Wasabi guys, Void here coming back at y'all with another one of my favorite commander cards. This time we are looking at what is quite possibly one of the best creatures in this entire format. I'm not just throwing that out there lightly, I honestly believe this is a top 5 creature in the format. Just because of its involvement in combo decks, its involvement in token decks, its involvement in just about every single black deck you can think of. I know it's not literally every black deck. You have control decks that don't play that many creatures, therefore they don't really need to play Blood Artist. But when you talk about a combination of mana efficiency and just what you get out of a card for that mana, this is yet another cheap card. And the last two cards I mentioned before, Authority of the Consuls and Altar of the Brood, those are also very cheap cards that put in a lot of work into the game, and you don't have to put any more mana into those cards. Well, Blood Artist is different, a little bit easier to remove because creatures are usually easier to remove than anything else. But Blood Artist is instead a way to also punish your opponents. Because after all, this is all about draining life from your opponents. He is a vampire after all. So whenever Blood Artist or another creature dies, target player loses 1 life and you gain 1 life. So this is very important because a lot of people are confused with triggers. This is whenever a creature dies, not whenever a creature's put into a graveyard. This can sometimes be confusing for some people, so if you were to board wipe with a Blood Artist on the field, a whole bunch of Blood Artist triggers go onto the stack because all of the creatures on the field are dying at the same time. Just having a 2-mana creature that's going to sit on the field whenever your opponents want to get a little risky there and board wipe, it's very easy to overlook a Blood Artist too. You'd be surprised at how many people play tokens, how many people go and combo off and they get infinite creatures. All you need is a board wipe and you pretty much win the game if you have Blood Artist out. And that's probably the main reason why he's just so popular, because in this format he's a combo card. You could throw him into something like a Gave Guru of Spores, which is basically a gigantic combo deck where you can combo off with cards like Ashnod's Altar or Doubling Season and get infinite death triggers. Well, if you have infinite death triggers, you win the game with Blood Artist. Throw it into something like Prosh Skyraider of Care and basically just combo off with cards like Food Chain, get a ton of tokens to sacrifice, and then win the game right there. So there's a lot of ways that you can combo off and win with this guy, but also just being one of the 99 in, hey, maybe a Vampire Tribal deck with Edgar Markov, one of the most popular commander options now. It's never a bad thing, even if it's just a graveyard synergistic deck like Meren of Clan Neltoth, where you don't necessarily spam a lot of death triggers, but it's more or less just about getting sacrifice triggers. Even gaining a little bit of life here or there, draining your opponents of a little bit of life here and there, is still very powerful. So if you're not familiar with its brother, Falconwrath Noble, basically this card stapled together with another Blood Artist, because that's essentially what it is. It's just 4 mana for the same exact ability, but on a 2/2 flying body. And he also sees a ton of play in the format as well, but Blood Artist is always going to be preferable no matter what format you want to put him in. Usually see some play in Modern because of the fact that he's just 2 mana. Mana efficiency, even though it's just a difference of 2 mana, can never really go wrong. And you might know his cousin, Zulaport Cutthroat, basically does a lot of similar things in a lot of similar decks, but very different because instead of all creatures, it's just your creatures dying and each opponent would lose a life and you gain a life. So in certain decks where all you care about is sacrificing your creatures, you don't really need to combo off. Well, Zulaport Cutthroat might be preferable, but if you want to get the most advantage or you want to impact the game, not just your side of the field, Blood Artist is definitely the way to go, and it's usually preferable to Zulaport Cutthroat, but in many decks we usually see all 3 of these creatures just because they're so good at draining life and so good at keeping you ahead of the game. You'd be surprised of how big of a life swing that is. Well, 10 creatures dying, you can single out one of your opponents, have them lose 10 life, well, you gain 10 life. You know, that's a 20-point life swing. That's ridiculous. Not that many creatures have to die for this card to have an impact is what I'm trying to say here. But anyway, just remember, it's all about impacting the game for as little mana as possible, and this is usually why I pick cards like these, because they're so good at doing that. So anyway, guys, you all have a wonderful day. Let me know what you think about Blood Artist. Void here, signing off.